Sometimes it turns out that there's a tabletop game that has been staring you in the face for the better part of 5 years. It's something that you've overlooked, and that you've missed the thematic conceit. It's something that calls to you, that you wanted as a part of your role-playing hobby. And up until that moment, that epiphany, you just didn't notice that it was really what you were looking for. For me, this is what just happened with Age of Rebellion role-playing game, one of the Star Wars games by Fantasy Flight. If you're interested in my thoughts on this and why I think it's something really special, have a look inside, grab a beverage. I'm the Complex Games Apologist. You don't have to be a news hound to have heard some things about Fantasy Flight Star Wars games. There's 3 of them: Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. And secondly, that these games use a unique dice resolution system that uses symbols on polyhedral dice to roll for a lot of different ideas at once. And that allows the pendulum of fate to swing and to really embody the space operatic feel of Star Wars, the swells of music. It's also something which takes a little getting used to, and I'll try my own walkthrough of how some of it works a little bit later in this video. But what I want to focus on right now and reply to is the idea that there are 3 games in this line, and why that I feel is a strength. So the first reason is because this allows each game to be focused. There's the scum and villainy element of Star Wars. There is the titanic struggle of good and evil, and of an authoritarian, fascistic, and deceitful regime in the Galactic Empire, and the upstarts, the guerrillas, the freedom fighters that are operating in cells, speaking in code, and forever in fear of being infiltrated and overwhelmed by the titanic might of the Imperial armies and fleets. So that's the reason that this game exists. Force and Destiny is about the struggle between the tension in individuals, between the good and the evil. And then I'll talk about that someday. The point is that each of these games zeroes in on an element of the space opera and allows a group of characters to be cohesive and have enough variety and inhabit enough different niches within that particular cohesive objective to really bring it to life at the table. I think that for the most part what we see in the films, when these 3 elements of scum and villainy, of personal morality, and of revolt and warfare, those 3 elements are brought together by the contrivance of an invisible hand, and essentially a railroad, if you will. And when we sit down at the table, we like to have a more cooperative and cohesive player group, I think. And for that matter, I think that this also allows us to really visit in more detail different kinds of emotions, different kinds of struggle, and ultimately to have starfighter battles and massive ground vehicle encounters and the like, and have them fit nicely into the overall arc of a campaign. And that's what Age of Rebellion does for us. The player characters are divided into what essentially are classes, their careers, their an essential kind of worldview or set of talents that influence the way that a character approaches the world. Leia is a diplomat and Luke is an ace. And there's a scout or spy, there's a soldier, there's a commander, and there's an engineer. And let me see if there's one more I've missed. And among those classes, the player characters will form the beginnings of a rebel cell. They start with some kind of starship, which is by default a captured Imperial Lambda-class shuttle, or they start with a short squadron of Y-wing fighters, or a base of operations. Now they're going to undertake some missions. They're going to cultivate the unique resource that allows them to advance within the rebellion and to gain more resources of the rebellion, called duty. If Edge of the Empire has the D100 obligation role, which is all about the character's underworld obligations, about the contracts and the bounties and the seedy goings-on that have led these characters to this moment that they're trying to struggle free of. Duty is about the higher calling that these characters experience and that pulls them towards heroic deeds because they're moved to try and bring the galaxy into a brighter age with the seed of hope that lies within them. So between the focused character options and the focused kind of topic of play and this mechanic which pulls on characters of duty and the destiny pool, which is shared in common among all the games, we get the thematic core, the reason that these games are different from one another. I understand some folks may want to juxtapose all the elements of Star Wars, and the games can interface nicely, but I think that the strength of them is that we are seeing a game which is about the rejection of a tyrannical authority. We're seeing something which really brings to life a struggle, just in the same way that Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse are two completely different games that share an engine. Two completely different games that have vastly different themes, and the type of horror involved is incredibly different. So it is the case with these games, that if you play Age of Rebellion, you're going to have a very different time than if you play Force and Destiny or Edge of the Empire. I know financially this might be a bitter pill to swallow, but I mean, the interesting thing is that for me, these dishes a la carte are incredibly appetizing. They call out to me in a way that just Star Wars, it does not inspire in the same way. And so I just challenge anyone who's stuck on the criticisms of this being a money grab because there's several games to consider that if one lets the idea of these games speak for themselves, to let the idea that this is a focus game about this or a focus game about that, to just let that come to life in their mind, then it'll pull you in. It really will. Between the layout of the pages, the incredible art, and the voice of the text, in Age of Rebellion especially, I can feel the characters' joy and anxiety as they infiltrate an Imperial bunker, and I can see the impulsive soldier seeing a moment to just take out a couple more Imperial fascist soldiers, and it really imperiling the mission his duty called to him. I can see all these little scenarios. I can see the hyperdrive motivator breaking and having to hide behind a hidden moon as vast Imperial squadrons of fighters fly over. To put it briefly, there's a voice here, rather than a babble. And I think that's an incredible asset. So let's talk about the dice system in these games. You have the green dice, which are skill dice. They have successes and they have advantages, which is a little bit like, a side quantity, additional kind of good stuff that can happen, kind of tangential to success or failure. Something like spotting an important weakness, or giving a little bit of extra oomph to a companion, or finding a little bit of cover that will disadvantage a foe that you can hide behind. It's all a shooting check with your ranged light skill, and yet there's a little bit more going on. This check is opposed by the purple opposition dice. I don't have the perfect name for all of these, and that has similarly failure icons and threat icons. And threat can be things like your position is exposed, your ammunition is beginning to run low, or the grip of your gun is starting to overheat. Just to give a few examples here. Now, these dice pools are relatively small. People will talk about rolling fistfuls of dice in the old West End D6 Star Wars game. And conversely, these dice pools are somewhere between kind of 5 and at the utter maximum 10 dice. So what happens with the green and the purple dice is that as different elements of character skill or the destiny pool, which we'll talk about in a moment, start to intervene, these dice get upgraded from the green D8 into a yellow D12, or a red d12. And these have more success and failure icons on them, and they also have triumph and despair icons, which are real, more acute turns of fate. They can be something like a critical hit, of course, but they can also be something like, I have you now. Things that really will turn the tide of battle. And the interesting thing about them is that they count as a success and a failure on the dice, but they can't be canceled. So you can roll a triumph and a despair at the same time. You can roll despair even as you've succeeded on a test. Now, what could that mean? That could mean that your footing starts to slip. You might be on a thin ledge and you did shoot the stormtrooper, but you also are now holding on for dear life. And that's the sort of energetic swing of the pendulum of fate that this dice system enables. That within a relatively few number of die rolls, things can really change and get complicated. You narrate these various threats and advantages, triumphs and despairs, and you bring to life what they mean in the fiction of the game. And they do have a list of what they can do, and you can play by that list. But the real joy is that as the dice pool hits the table, the players and the GM together pick up what the dice are saying and turn it into what has happened in the shared imagined reality. Hence why it's called the narrative dice system. But notwithstanding that, I think that the actual texture of play is fairly old school. I mean, you just do what your character says. It's not like story gaming. I want to point out that the rumors are very exaggerated there. And I think this brings us to the important sort of story currency that is core to all these games, called the Destiny Pool. And this might have a certain reputation, or you might have a certain idea about what it means. I think that it just means that there's always hope in Star Wars, that the dark side is always looming. And so there's white tokens and they flip over into black tokens as the players use them, and vice versa. They're used to upgrade the dice to d8s, either in the positional check or in the player's good pool of dice. Or they can be used to conjure something like a breathing mask when you find yourself in a hostile environment. And you always packed it. Yeah, I remember that. That sort of thing. And this allows things to move on at a steady clip. If the players really find themselves in a pinch where they have to succeed at a particular die roll, they can upgrade the check with a spend from the Destiny Pool. And I think that that's a place where the system really shines. Now, to sum up this section about the unique dice rolls in this system, I think that it's important to point out that there have been some criticisms about the financial aspect here, or that your existing dice collection is not going to work with this game. And it's true, they can be a little bit expensive. There is a dice app that if you put it on a tablet and keep it in the middle of the table, it really works for the way dice get rolled in this game, and that's a pretty inexpensive app that Fantasy Flight puts out. Secondly, if you play online, there are a dozen or more amazing tools to roll the dice as the system asks you to, and for the computer to spit it back at you in a visually appealing and easily understood way. Roll20 has a great tool. There's a Discord bot. There are web apps, they're just websites that have the die roller. There's not a lot standing in your way here when it comes to the dice. And in fact, as you're learning the dice engine, if you hit a hiccup as far as learning how the symbols cancel one another, these apps can take care of that and get you to the final result a little bit quicker if that's something that you're concerned about. So in total, again, the financial criticism here just doesn't ring true for me, because not only do I roleplay online, but even at a physical table, because of the way these dice are rolled, with the group collaborating on a given check to create the fiction, it's not a hurry up and tell me if you succeeded or failed, John. It's an entire beat. And that's the way the combat system is calibrated. including, the rounds being something more like a minute rather than 6 seconds, it all fits into place. And it's just not a place that I think that this system can be assailed. To give you an idea of the price of the dice, the beginner boxes of the game go for $20 online. They include a perfectly usable set of the dice, and that'll get you going playing Age of Rebellion, Edge of the Empire, or Force and Destiny. So finally, let's take a little bit deeper look at some elements of the game: combat and character advancement. Characters advance through talent trees. You might be familiar with these from games like Diablo or Path of Exile. You spend your experience points to move through a ladder or a web of various talents which advance different characteristics of your character. You can pick up a new tree and open up that specialization by spending XP. And there's a lot of depth here. You can earn 1,000 XP or more over the course of a campaign, even though individual spends are 5 or 10 at a time. And there's room in this game for that to be possible. These talent trees are where characters come to life and start to differentiate themselves one from another. Because at the core, characters have a relatively kind of small set of numbers. You can have a skill of 3 and an ability of 2. And that's all you need to know, and that's what the opposition walks up to the table with very often, as far as the game master adversaries. This allows things to turn over and for you to do frequent encounters kind of ad-libbed and on the fly in a way that other games wouldn't be able to. So that's how characters and how adversaries work a little bit. Now let's talk about the combat system. I think that this is another place where it really is an interesting mix of elements. There's a very simple action economy. One character goes and another character goes. You create an initiative ladder cooperatively with the rest of your team, and on each of your turns you get what's called a maneuver or a minor action, and then a full action like an attack. Finally, the combat systems, both the space combat system and down on the ground, are deeply embedded in the theater of the mind. It would be difficult to use miniatures even if you wanted to. It's all about what is my range between myself and you. I'm at short range. Alright, well I'm going to use a maneuver to get to long range. And that's going to change my relative range between me and a minion or a minion group out there. Meanwhile, the minion group could move closer to one of my friends, but not closer to me. That's how these ranges are kind of more abstract and really live up here rather than on a miniatures grid. And this means that I think, again, you can ad-lib these encounters quickly. You can feel the tides of battle, the unexpected turns of fate that are the core of what Star Wars is all about. Okay, so it's time to bring things home and ask, how did I miss this game? Why am I talking about it now, about 5 years after it came out? It's because I assumed that it was a pulpy Star Wars game. I didn't realize that it really had the seeds of kind of moral gray areas, like the international brigades that took part in the fight against Franco in Spain, Ernest Hemingway being one of them. And there are more recent historical figures that have carpetbagged their way into other people's revolutions that come to mind. And there's also just the hopeful struggle, just the hopeful moment where people are going to throw off the chains of a regime that has trodden on them for far too long. And these hopeful moments of revolution, and we can go back as far as the American War of Independence and Washington's Army and the Sons of Liberty if we want to. You can look to so many different human stories, both of the revolutions that were crushed underfoot and the ones that succeeded and brought about change or looked a great deal like what came before them. That's the sort of ambiguity and struggle that leads me to feel like these characters could become heroes, or they could die in the dirt, or they might end up feeling ultimately compromised, and that the victory is bittersweet. It's the kind of questions that this game brings to mind, and it's all embedded in a really pulpy and fun, happy-go-lucky kind of genre sauce. You still get to Star Wars. You still get to hear pew, 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 as you have your fun. And yet, there's the opportunity for so much more to emerge over the course of play. The duty resource says to me that a character will find the spotlight. You have the tools as the game master to sort of have fate conspire to say something about why this character is still struggling against the Empire, what they hope to achieve next. And the advancement track, the idea of the contribution rank, is another place where, if a character is going to become the captain of a capital starship that is going to raid the far corners of the Empire and recruit thousands to the cause of the rebellion, there's a pathway to that at least has some mechanical assistance. But, like the dice system, it's a little bit open-ended how it's used. It's a little bit like OSR in that these tools within the system are really not as fixed as they may seem in rumor or on first reading. They're tools for the game master and they're tools for the group to create a living, breathing story. It has elements of modern gaming and it has an advancement track that can sustain a campaign for the long term. It has this combat system, which is delightfully abstract and yet alive with purpose and with fiction and with tantalizing beats of story and of action. And you don't need map and miniatures to do it. In fact, you're almost discouraged from bringing that baggage into play. You need to tell the tale as the player and as the game master. And that invitation that is just suffused in Fantasy Flight Star Wars, and in Age of Rebellion in particular, this invitation to tell a new tale is contagious, infectious. It's something that I really wanted to share with you, my enthusiasm as I discovered this game. Hope to talk to you more about it on the channel, and I want to give you my resounding recommendation for Age of Rebellion. Thanks. I'm the Complex Games apologist.